welcome everyone to the Future of Education series that we've been hosting. And my name is So-Young Kang. I'm the founder and CEO, and I'm really excited and I'm delighted to be here with everyone today on a topic that many people have been asking, which is around how to manage the remote classroom. And I'm just delighted to have two guests with us here today. I think some of you are excited to be here, as I am too. So allow me to first introduce Professor John Kim from Harvard Business School. His bio is in the app, so I'm not going to share, but he's amazing, a thought leader in the whole edtech space. So we're really just delighted. And he's recently created a program in Gnowbe around how to manage remote classrooms. And so, John, would love for you to just share, what motivated you to join this webinar.
So-Young, good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm just delighted to be here with you, So-Young. Thanks for having me. When you think about, even before the pandemic, the idea of microlearning in a way that you can access the content anytime, anywhere, on any device has always held a lot of promise and excitement for me as I was thinking about ways in which we can democratize education around the world. And I think, especially with the pandemic, it's become even more so. And so I'm just delighted to be here with you and get into depth about, the way that the classrooms of the futures are going to look. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, John. And for some of you who want to take a quiz about John, feel free to do so. And allow me to introduce Armand. Armand, I met through the Global Teacher Prize in Dubai many years ago. He's an award-winning lecturer, author. He just wrote a fantastic book, Where's the Hope, over the COVID period. So Armand, what motivated you to join this conversation?
It's twofold, really. One, it was an opportunity to have a coffee and have a chat with you, obviously. Anytime that's a possibility, it's well worth my time. And then second of all, after reading John's awesome bio, I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity to pick John's brain as well. So I'm here for the ride. I think it's more of an opportunity to discuss with global leaders in each of your fields, and anytime that's a possibility, it's my job to step up and grab that, because your network is obviously something that's extremely important, especially as a teacher nowadays, where you can bring those people into your classroom and have them participate with your students. It's extremely important. So I thought this was an important phone call for me to be on.
Super, and I think that's fantastic. And I think what you said about, really about sharing and collaborating in terms of ideas. And so we're going to have this conversation. We know this is obviously more than an hour-long conversation. This is probably a year. I know many of you have been having this conversation for the last, year. And so we hope to just continue that conversation and dialogue really in the group board. What's been really interesting is when we did our Future of Education talk back in August, we still have people now downloading it and still engaging in the conversation. So we invite you to do the same. So without further ado, my bio is in here, so I won't bore you with that. And you can get to meet a lot of the other participants in the group as Deb said anytime. So please do say hi. I think we have a really global audience here. We have people from Egypt, I see Switzerland, New York, California, not California, Canada. But please do, introduce yourselves, and let's just jump right in to our topic. For those of you who are following along in the app, it's how remote learning is changing education. So we're going to really start the conversation around the global trends around remote learning and the challenges that the education industry is facing. And so we've put in here a few articles, and we're not going to go through all the articles and videos here, but we wanted it to provide a little context. And so I think I want to just start the conversation, maybe with John or Armand to share, given this conversation, right, in terms of the pandemic sending 1.5 billion children home, remote learning is completely disrupting. What are some of the biggest pain points that you've been observing, and where are people really struggling the most?
So who do you want to start? Do you want to
start, John?
Sure, I'll start. Listen, I think in some ways, the remote learning has highlighted all the gaps that we know that exist in society, whether it's something as basic and as important as connectivity and the ability to access information and educational content. So it has exacerbated the inequities that we see. But specifically in terms of learning, I think it's also highlighted highlighted the issues around knowledge development of kids and students, as well as their social, emotional learning and behavioral aspects of it, which we also value. So, one outcome of the pandemic is I think parents and communities have an even deeper appreciation for the holistic role that school plays. And at the same time, I think it's also highlighted the incredible gaps and all the things that we need to do in order to make sure that we're creating educational environments that are up to the challenges of educating kids for the society that we live in today.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. And what do you see as one of the biggest gaps that you've observed, given that?
And the biggest gaps that I see in terms of on the educational side is, taking a step back, if you really think about the teacher's role, most of the world kind of think of the teacher as, despite what we say is the sage on the stage is kind of the glib way to think about it, but it's the person who holds the knowledge and spends the time in the classroom to transfer it, whether that transferring vehicle is a blackboard or it's a tablet. It's basically, I know stuff and I want you to know this stuff to the students, and I want you to learn it as quickly and efficiently as possible. I'm obviously oversimplifying and exaggerating to a bit. But when I think in the remote learning environment, what's really highlighted is that, hey, some students are learning at different paces. This whole notion of what's called mastery learning, it's not fixed time learning. Some kids can go really far ahead and things like that. And our systems are not built to be able to customize and individualize that learning, despite the fact that we've been talking about it for decades. And so I think in some ways, this pandemic is also an incredible opportunity for us to redefine what education is all about. How do we think about delivering and supporting students, content to students, and supporting them in their development? So in some ways, I think it's an incredible opportunity, yet obviously there are a tremendous number of obstacles that stand in the way.
Absolutely. I mean, Armand, I know you're about to go into class here right after this webinar. So you're in the classroom. What are you seeing? And, you're in Canada right now, right?
I am, yeah. So, and I've got a pretty broad global perspective as well in terms of what's happening in the classrooms. I'd agree with John with some of the key statements in particular. In terms of the equity gap, we're obviously seeing it widen, and with the closures of school, it's there for everybody to be able to acknowledge now, and it's bare. So governments are either going to have to step up in industry and say, you know what, we really need to play a part into making sure we have broadband access for all. The countries that were able to pivot very quickly to remote learning, like Uruguay, which is not a country that you would think about, pivoted within 48 hours, had the infrastructure to be able to do so. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously being able to own the technology, and then the equity piece in terms of where are you going to be doing that learning and what space, and do you have food, and do you have the mental health resources, and so on. So that obviously is something that remote learning has popped up, and schools have been putting Band-Aids on that forever. We've done the most we can. We've done bottle drives to be able to feed kids in the morning and at lunchtime and for supper, right? Like there's all sorts of different programs that we've put into place, but depending on where you are in the world, you either have social programs to really help those kids that are in need, and those are the ones that are struggling the most. To refer a bit to what John said in terms of the pedagogical point of view, in terms of the teacher, the sage on the stage, I think you need to divide it up and look at it from a perspective of not just education as a whole, but also from a perspective of the different age levels, which really changes what the approach to the classroom should be. So at the end of the day, context really matters. And context, depending on culture, governance, school leadership, the whole 9 yards, your communities, family dynamics. In Western society, most families, when your parents get a bit older, they put them in old folks' homes, or in versus in a lot of other regions in the world, they actually are part of the household and can help the child develop those skills that they need at home. So context really matters in terms of that, and also which grade level. So, from K to 2 is very different to 3 to 5 grade level, to middle school, which is the rewiring of the brain and the immaturity. And then you go into high school, which is very much more on the creative side and the scaffolding of learning. And then you get into university, and remote learning works in many different ways in university that doesn't work in schools. And John hit it on the nail when he talked about a holistic approach to education. So I actually think mastery for teachers now is more important than ever in terms of the art part of our job. So understanding where the zone of proximal development is for each child for all of these, from a social emotional point of view, from an academic point of view, which could be vastly different. We could end up with people like Doogie Howser, which have academic side are already at Harvard at 14 years old, but on a social emotional side are a 2-year-old. Right. So like you have to figure that one out in terms of zone of proximal development. How can you push it? What kind of projects you can put into play? What does he truly need? Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. It's that the art part of our job is oftentimes misunderstood and also misrepresented in one-liners. But what ends up happening is that relationship that you build with children and how you can then start to push the right buttons and help them in their learning, I think, is what's key at the moment.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's like I said at the beginning, this is not a 1-hour conversation. Each of the points, we can spend hours on each one. And I think one of the things, that I'm hearing in terms of the opportunity, because obviously challenges are also huge opportunities, is this level of personalization and individualization kind of on steroids. And, we have been talking about it for such a long time. So now those who have been doing it better are starting to see the impacts of that. And those who haven't are kind of scrambling. And so you're seeing it, I think, across the board. And I really love the dimensions of socioeconomic, culture, context in that conversation, as well as, innate abilities, capabilities as well, in terms of how we're pacing that. I'm going to just switch gears a little bit to also then build off of that conversation in terms of, and I think we're starting to talk about the tools and capabilities. Before that, I'm curious to kind of get a sense of our participants here, because I think we have people from all around the world. And I'm just curious, more of a curiosity, given this kind of state that we're in, some schools are reopening again. Do we think we're ever going to really go back to this new normal, or is this the opportunity we have to really take advantage of that opportunity, right? And so, we've been doing this, and we've been really quite surprised at some of the responses. This is quite unique. And last time we did this, we had people who really were thinking more around 3 to 5 years. And so I think this group is a little bit more on the we're not going back group. But I think it's really interesting because you're almost seeing that in conversations. Like some educational leaders we speak to are like doing the wait and see approach. And they're just hoping and praying that they can get back into the classroom to use the chalkboard again, right? And then you have some that are like, okay, we're gonna dabble a little bit here. And actually, very few, I think, are really fully embracing and saying we wanna pioneer and take advantage. So it's interesting. So I'm curious on what your experiences are, either one. And maybe you can share, what are you seeing, and who's adapting well? What are you seeing in terms of the mindsets and things that are required?
I could jump in on that one if you wish,
please,
and then maybe John coming back, because I think I'll set it up for John here. I think it's a mixed bag of all over the place, and truly, I think the major part to this is the people that can think innovatively in very bureaucratic positions, right? Because at the end of the day, going back to normal is not about school teachers per se. It's about school leaderships, policy, politicians, and what's going to be their approach post-COVID-19. If it's addressing the GDP and addressing austerity measures to get there, we are going to go back into 1940. because that's going to be the most cost efficient way of doing it. If we are going to look at the holistic health of the whole nation and each of our communities, then I do believe we are going to go in the right direction. So I think it truly is one of those things that we need to rethink the whole system, right? So standardized testing is a really big issue, particularly in the US, but also in other areas around the world. So if standardized testing does not take a new form, or if it still is the overall biggest elephant in each of our rooms, then that's going to be a key issue for us moving forward towards a holistic education, because at the end of the day, they want results for a test. So I think that's part of it. The second thing is I think we also need to own the vocabulary and own the conversation in a bit of a different way. Personalization and individualization can happen within our schools, but at some point it got to be a point where tech was going to replace teachers. And I know we've heard this oftentimes that no, that's not the case, but we've seen it. There's some jurisdictions around the world that have just put a laptop in front of a child and said, here, this is where your curriculum is from chapter 1 to chapter 12. This is what you're doing today. Stay here. There's a security guard that walks around. And that we know is not the right approach to it. Technology can enhance great pedagogy tenfold, but without that great pedagogy, you're only going to have a very minuscule amount of the population, maybe 10%, that really will thrive. And then you have another 90% that are going to struggle. So I believe we need innovators in positions of bureaucratic that are there to protect their fiefdoms. And if we really need to listen to everybody to be able to innovate and move forward, I think that's my key message there. It's really depending on who your leadership is. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Armand, I think that's great. And I love the way that you started with the kind of the policy level of things. And I think the way you framed it, I think I'm completely in agreement. So maybe I'll kind of take the other side, which is kind of what's actually happening inside the schools. I read the psychological studies a while back where it basically says people need at least 6 weeks of continuously doing something in order to form a habit. So, it's a little bit like the example was, if you actually develop a habit, you don't actually have to think about what you're doing. You just kind of do it. If you have to make a plan every day and try to do something differently, unless you do that for 6 weeks, it can kind of break apart. It's a little bit like brushing our teeth every morning. We don't really think about it. We don't put a plan in our calendar saying we're going to wake up in the morning and brush our teeth. We just kind of do it because it's a habit. And I think using technology and personalizing and changing all of that was a little bit like we had to make a plan every day to do that. And so it never became a habit of how we actually work. It wasn't ingrained. And I think one of the far-reaching effects of the pandemic and how it has disrupted our lives. So that whole poll that you showed, Gnowbe, So-Young, on Gnowbe about when will it go back to normal, I kind of think you'll never go back to normal. It's obviously a definition of what the air quotes are about what normal is. If you mean people are going to go back into a physical classroom, sure, maybe that's the right time frame. But if you're really thinking about how education is going to be practiced and how we think about the role of the teacher and the role of the parent and role of the students and what are the materials and the tools that we're going to use to help students. Yeah. In some ways, I think it's been over 6 weeks. In fact, it's been over 6 months. I think there is going to be a permanence to this change. And that's why I think, Armand, where you started with this about there is an opportunity at a kind of a high policy level to say, so now that we have this blank sheet of paper, quote unquote, what can we do? What should we do?
I'd agree, So-Young, with John. The only thing I'm going to say there is that in the jurisdictions that are capable of doing those changes now and creating those habits, they will. In the jurisdictions that equity, and again, we're going back to context, that equity is the major issue and they can't pivot, and it's radio learning or TV learning or one computer for all learning. I'm not so sure that it's going to pivot that drastically going forward, right? So I think the equity issue needs to come in with the pedagogical practice. And I agree with John in terms of the habits. It's being able to use the LMS to really be that where you hold everything and then plan from there from a pedagogical point of view in these two, because we have a blended world, right? We have a world that's at school and we have a world that's home.
No,
Yeah, Armand, just to piggyback on that, Armand, because I really agree with that. You know, it's a little bit like before the smartphone came out, and there's both the tool portion of this as well as the habits portion. I mean, I think our flip phones or early cell phones that I had were kind of designed by engineers to be used by engineers, and they were chock full of features that most of us could not use. And I look at a lot of the ed tech stuff that's out there. It's like they were designed by people. I'm not sure who they were designing it for, but they weren't designed for, you know, most people that I know that are in the classroom, whether it's K-12 or higher ed.
Exactly.
And, you know what I mean? It's like designed by engineers for engineers. And what I see now is obviously there's been a great deal of advancement on usability and all that kind of stuff. But also, the bigger point that you're making is it's going to get integrated into the core of our work. If it's actually vital to the work that we do, then people will figure out how to use it. If it's not, then, you know, it's just a nice to have. So.
And one of the things that's been really interesting too, in terms of the virtual and blended experience. So in terms of kind of habit forming, I think people have been forced. So one of, I think, the surprising ahas is that people, because we speak to the educators every day, right? And we're hearing, wow, we never thought that they were terrified of getting in front of a video Zoom camera. And all of a sudden, their agility, because they were forced in some ways, for those who had the technology and who had the ability to do so, were forced to kind of develop that. And so you're starting to see even kind of then the need to develop those capabilities even further, because we've kind of started on the track of not knowing to now knowing a bit, then knowing what we don't know, to then refine some of those capabilities and skills of how to even use technology in the classroom in a way that is effective, personalized, because there's many layers to this, right? And so I think, on the one hand, you have people saying, oh, we've digitized, we use Zoom in the classroom now. And I'm like, that's not truly digitizing. That's using technology. How are you engaging your students? And I think what triggered this conversation and topic, was how are we engaging students in the classroom when it's remote in the way that we're doing it right now?
So Young, to tag on to that, it's twofold, right? The first one is I'm going to protect the teachers a bit here, and I'm going to talk about doing your job twice. And one of the reasons why technology wasn't integrated necessarily the right way is the equity piece, because we ended up having to do our job twice. So you would do it on an LMS and you would have half the kids be able to do it. The other half of the kids are bringing it in a paper copy, and then you're not sure where the assignments are. What are you doing? Where are you going? Did I hand it in? Did they not hand it in? And then it becomes really a mess, right? Yeah. So instead of doing that, it was a lot easier to just do it through the classroom, use technology on the creative side, use apps like Clips and so on, and get them to create with technology, but not necessarily integrate technology within the pedagogical practice in terms of how you approach a classroom. Now, that being said, nowadays, again, I think we're going sometimes with the carrot first instead of the horse. And why I'm saying that is because sometimes they look at the technology first instead of looking at the pedagogical practice and how do you create self-pacing guides where children can go at their own pace. They have everything that they need in front of them. They know where they're going. And then you have mini conferences to catch them up. You know where everybody is. You can measure the zone of proximal development, right? So, and then you choose the tool. Then you choose the tool that supports it the best, right?
Yeah, and on that, it's really about like starting with the objective in mind. And I think where we're probably in violent agreement is around designing for the user, for the learning effectiveness, for outcomes. And it's shocking, honestly, that that many people don't think about that. They think about bells and whistles. And so we're going to kind of move on to another to kind of build off of that conversation. But because this conversation obviously is so rich, and there are people from around the world here with different contexts, we would love to hear from you and have an opportunity for you to share and engage. So this is a question that we have. So I know some of you have already answered those questions. I do invite you all to do that. We're not going to do that right now. I'm going to remind myself to do it later. But then to really share your reflections and really in your local context, because I think it will help us all to get this global perspective in the conversation with not just the three of us, but with all the people that are on this that are having this conversation. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. We're wanting to walk the talk, that an engaging remote experience is not listening to a few people talk at you for an hour, but it's an experience where you're contributing and participating, and so that peer-to-peer social learning experience is taking place. And so, we've been kind of shifting, the conversation around technology and virtual learning. And I know that a lot of people have joined this webinar because they want to know, okay, like there's definitely this context, but I'm using technology, I'm using Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and I want to be effective. I want to engage my students, but I can't see the faces like us right now of all the people on this webinar. I can't see them. Cameras are off. I don't know if they're, if they're even there, right? And how do I really, engage with them? And so, quick little poll here for all of you. How well do you think you have adapted tech in your classroom, assuming some of you have? And please be honest here. Well, this is a very tech-savvy group here. But for those who are joining, we have the majority of you said 8 to 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, which is quite good in terms of, so I'd be dying to hear. Please do share how you're doing that, because I think there's lessons to be learned here for other schools. So let's see, we're gonna give people a chance to do that. But this group is predominantly an 8 to 10 group. But then, I think when we talk about that, so what are you guys doing? And I guess, John, what are you seeing in terms of how people are adopting tech well? Because we've talked about what's not going well when you have engineers designing, right, for that. So what is stuff you've seen that works well?
In some ways, maybe I'll just reframe the question a bit, because at the end of the day, I think we need to keep reminding ourselves that the technology is just a tool, and fundamentally engagement between students and school, and just to be very specific around K-12, for example, as opposed to higher ed, is a very different opportunity, set of circumstances. A lot of research basically shows where if students feel a sense of belonging in that school, and that can mean that they have a real connection with an adult, they have a connection with a group of friends, they have a real engagement around a specific topic or an activity that they have. If they have some sense of belonging with school, attendance is high. I saw some questions on Gnowbe around, how do you measure attendance in this world, and so none of that changes. And I think the challenge, obviously, is that when you're working remotely and using technology, we lack the physical proximity to help us create that sense of belonging. But I just think there are lots of ways to do it, lots of other different ways to do it, but it takes a different set of activities and concerns and focus. And it's not clear to me that teachers are universally thinking about that way. So just to break it down, some of the work that we've been doing, for example, in Los Angeles Unified School District, has come down to really some really basic things, like what should teachers do before class to create a sense of engagement for students, not just when they're on, like what can you do? And they include everything from having students call each other and creating having group chats and things of that nature, doing whip arounds with text to say, just kind of replicating what you may want to do before class, like, hey, do a 30-second on a random basis, just say, how are you? Say one thing that happened yesterday that gave you joy, whatever it is. And then what can you do during class, quote unquote, during the synchronous part, that you can create engagement, and you can imagine some things that we think about, breakout rooms and all that kind of stuff. And then what can you do afterwards? But I think we should think of technology as a tool for what we already know about each other, which is it's a sense of belonging that's really important for engagement.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love the framing of it's not just the time when you're on remote, right? It's the whole experience of it and the journey of it. I mean, Armand, how are you doing? I'm sure you have a ton of great ideas how you're doing this.
I completely agree with John and how he's touching about it. It's technology is a tool. And I'll be honest, when I read John's biography, I wasn't sure where I was going with professor at Harvard and business school and tech. And I was thinking, okay, I'm in for a conversation on austerity possibly here. But the human side of John is coming through fully here. And he's completely right. It's a tool. And if it's used properly, it's going to enhance like any other tool that we use in the classroom. Yeah. But it has tenfold possibilities versus a lot of other tools that we have in the classroom don't have that exponential growth possibility. So I think he hit it on the nail when he talks about it's about building relationships and about that sense of belonging. Those two things are key, and connecting to an adult is key as well within the classroom. So as you're doing remote learning, if you haven't had a chance to be at the site, which some schools are not, we're in a blended learning. So we see the students one day, don't see them the next. And it's twofold the amount of work because you're now in two different worlds with two different tracks of people because they divide the classroom in two. So that's a bit different. But in terms of building the relationships, you need to think about, okay, if you're on a call and you're with another 29 students or 30 students, the chances of building relationships in that 1 hour are pretty small. However, you can do some team building activities like you would do in a corporate retreat or so on. Now, that being said, if you put in the time at the front end as a teacher, making individual phone calls and having each child there, have their guardians there, have a conversation with both of them, and then start building those relationships, and you start knowing, okay, what makes them tick. Then you can start personalizing and individualizing the self-pacing guides and connecting it to the curriculum and help them grow. So I think that's part of it, is to do the front end, really make a lot of phone calls, get to know them, and then use the synchronicity time in terms of, I apologize, the bells are going here. Use the synchronicity time. Yeah, it's alive. So use the synchronicity time where you flip it, make it student-centered. It's not about the teacher delivering the lecture. You can do that in many different ways. You can use Flipgrid, you can do microlearning, you can do YouTube video, whatever. And probably there's plenty of other videos out there that are good. What you want to do is you want to use that time so that they could be collaborative. They can talk about a subject. They can approach a case study like they would in medical school. Why not do different case studies on ecosystems for grade 4s, right? And then they can approach it and see how they could create their own. But it's very much how you approach the creation of your classroom setting for those students. And you have to think about that. It's a lot of deep thought, a lot of philosophical thinking, collaboration between peers, and then build those relationships as much as you can. And then you use the tools that you can, because there's a bunch of apps out there that can do what you would do with a whiteboard in a more synchronized lecturing style, which has to happen. There's stuff that you need to know, right? Yeah. But then there's other things that are more of a deep dive, problem-based, where you don't necessarily need that, but you need the collaborative time. So you need to tell them you need to show them how to collaborate, which I think the Checklist Manifesto, which was written by one of Professor John's colleagues at Harvard, Atul Gawande, is a great way of approaching that and looking at it from a perspective of, there's certain things that we need to check off the list, but in terms of collaboration for the surgeons, the biggest issue was that they didn't introduce themselves to the nurses. So when they got into as a team, they didn't feel capable of stepping in. The nurses didn't feel capable of stepping in when they saw a mistake. So how do you collaborate? How do you build that team? That team aspect, I think, also comes into play.
Yeah.
John, what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I wanted to build on that because I think it's right on the money. And I wanted to bring in a very specific example. In Africa and India, there's a school that's being built out. It's called Bridges Academy. That many people may know. It's a low cost private school that's been funded by lots of social impact venture capitalists and things like that. And they essentially provide private school education for $5, $5 a month. And one of the things that's very particular about that school's pedagogy is that they script out exactly what happens in every classroom. They actually select teachers that are not veteran teachers. They will select, people that have different characteristics, more on the kind of the social emotional side, but not necessarily are certificated or formal education as a teacher. But then they give them this script, like, start the class with this. It's like that checklist manifesto. You start the class by saying the following things, and you do this, and so I talked, a good friend of mine was the chief academic officer who created all that. And I said, hey, okay, let me get this. So you're taking all the artistry, like one criticism could be you're taking all the artistry out of teachers. Why do you do that? And how do you respond to that? And he said, listen, John, that is true, but here's the thing. By scripting the entire lesson and getting people who are willing to follow it, not actually change it, we can build in these exercises that are student-centered. So we literally say, you're going to stop 20 minutes into the lesson and you're going to have students pair up with each other and ask each other the following questions and, use these kind of the manipulative, the fancy word for whatever is in the, whether it's pebbles or marbles or what they're doing to do a math lesson, and they're going to make them talk to each other. And so just by the mere fact that teachers are willing to let students talk to each other, it gets the students excited about learning. It gets them focused on the fact that they can actually have some agency around this. And the secondary effects of that are far more than just learning that lesson. And so there's this kind of this idea that, you gotta get students to be excited about learning before you can do anything else.
I mean, it's sorry to interrupt, but I mean, it's really about experiential participatory learning. I mean, the thing is that, I mean, there's 30 years of research around how humans learn, right? At least 30 years, right? Around the idea that we need to participate and have conversations and be experiential. I mean, we call it MPPG as an approach. And so we kind of invented this acronym in response to the technology response to the MOOCs, right? Which was massive open online courses. And we said, yeah, that's not, we want it to be based on pedagogy and andragogy and humanagogy, right? Which is the science of humans and adults as well as children. And then we created this thing called MPPG around being, mobile first, which is really more about accessibility than the technology, participatory, personalized, and group-based, which is what we're talking about, is how are we doing that? Go ahead, Arman. I know you want to jump in here.
Oh, no. You were going. I was just checking the chat group. That's all. I apologize. Yeah, I do have reservations on Bridge Academy, though. I'm not. I knew we were going to get to a point where we had some conflict.
But that's always good. That's how we learn, Armand. That's how we learn.
Yeah. So I do have reservations on Bridge Academy because I do think that from a teacher's point of view, I think they're doing a lot of things that are driving the profession down into more of an occupational model, and I believe they're getting away with it in settings that can't afford or in contexts that can't afford professional teachers, so they go this route. And I don't believe that that's like the Checklist Manifesto. When I was referring to it, I meant more in terms of when the kids are looking at collaborating, they don't know, we assume that they know each other, and that there are some steps there that they could take, and it could be a checklist. But in terms of the professionalism of teachers, one of the reasons why Bridge Academy needs to give a checklist is because they don't have any teachers. They hire people off the street that have none of the science background. So if you take teaching as a science and an art, the science part we have pretty down packed in terms of how we scaffold learning for the subject matters. We have that one pretty down packed. And that's where technology can have a lot of impact in terms of AI in particular, in terms of helping us build that and us stepping in at the right times. But the art part of that, our job is where we know when you see a kid's eyes and you know that, okay, he's in trouble. This is not the time to push the button on the academic side. We need to have a conversation about social emotional or something's happening at home. And I think that you need to really watch out. And that's where I was going with austerity measures. You know, if you bring Bridge Academy into Alabama, I think we're going to get a lot of problems in the U.S. in that context. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up because I agree with John
I like it,
on a lot
Armand.
of the other things, but that one
I'm
So
glad.
no, this
ahead,
is all
John.
good. Go ahead. Well, no, this is good because I'm not an agent for Bridge, but here's the larger point, and kind of putting in technology is the larger point that we're debating here is the unbundling of the role of the teacher. Mm-hmm. Meaning, you just mentioned to be a good teacher, you have to be good at content. And by the way, traditionally, we have always privileged content expertise over everything else globally when we select a teacher, when we kind of identify what's a good teacher. But I think in this day and age, what we're really talking about is you have to be good at the content. You have to be good at understanding the child's needs, social emotional learning, behavioral needs. How do you actually mentor that person? How do you, there's all sorts of things. That's what I think you're talking about.
And know where you're going to go, right?
Right, and know where you're going to go. Right.
And I think that's what's oftentimes forgotten, and John hits it right there on the nail, is you have all sorts of different expertise, but it's also that part of you are also the one that's sort of navigating for the child where they're heading, and that's based off the context, it's based off culture, it's based off, there's so many different things that come into play there. And oftentimes that's a forgotten piece of what we do in the classroom, right?
But I think we're seeing a lot, right? So go ahead, John, because I want to,
no. So the final point there is, so the basic question for me comes down to education, or at least pre-K to sixth grade education is a global activity. Virtually, it hasn't reached universal, attendance, but it's a global activity.
It's close.
The problem is the quality is highly variable. In most parts of the world, it's actually pretty bad. So let's just put that on the table. So the basic question then comes down to, here's an activity, human activity, that billions of people around the world actually are participating in some level. And we're not good at it. And so we should be better at it, given all the amount of time, effort, money that goes into this, and the importance of it, not to mention that. And so then I think this is where technology can play a huge role. And I think the one part of I think the criticism about what you said about Bridge, I would also agree with. But here's the one thing that maybe you and I may differ on. If you could use technology and combine it with teachers who actually can do the stuff that technology cannot do, which is around the social emotional learning and the supports and the mentoring and stuff like that. The stuff that you were talking about, looking at the eyes of the student and saying, hey, this is, this student really needs something else. I think you don't need to be a teacher, necessarily a certified teacher for that. You need to have certain other kinds of characteristics and empathy for that.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because so I used to teach middle school, right, in Japan many years ago, a group of 40 students, and I believe the classroom is pretty similar to what it was. I'm not going to share how many years ago, but it was more than 20 years ago, right? And so the style of teaching, and I think, Armand, I wish that every teacher that I interacted with knew the science of teaching that you're talking about. That has not been my experience, right? So I think there is a huge gamut in terms of, the capabilities that we're requiring of teachers now. And I think it's changing. I think the focus of content being at the center point is no longer like the critical capability, because we have Google now. And we need to evolve from an industrial revolution style, and I'm sure you've heard this many times before, into this new model, where I think this new model is really about humanizing these experiences, and it's about the delivery. And I think in some ways, both of you are kind of saying that the social, emotional part, the delivery of that experience, which is not just about the material, because the material, it depends on the kid, right? And some kids, learn on their own, right?
Yeah, I would say, look, I'm not disagreeing with either one of you in terms of, I think we're all on the same page, and most of the heavy stuff or the foundational things, the referring to Google for content. I think it's a great one-liner, It makes total sense. But digital competency, digital literacy, digital navigation is something that needs to be taught, and with some pretty real scaffolding in terms of being able to interpret what's online and what's strong and what's not. And I think that's part of what we did with content in the past. Now, mind you, the content oftentimes, if I look at social studies content, like it's based off one perspective, let's be honest, white male that wrote it at some point. So I do understand that, but there's also a bunch of skill sets that come into play, and there's some foundational pieces that the scaffolding has to happen that you can't necessarily just go onto Google. There's only about 10% of the children that would actually be self-directed that way to be able to do so, right? Like if you go into Orange County and you have 95% of your people that are well off, the motivation's not the same as if you go in the slums of Mumbai, right? So it's a bit different there, right? So like when you're looking at the Sugatra Mitra's research, yeah, I agree with it in some ways, but it's not necessarily the case. Like, I mean, we have a bunch of children in class right now that I'm teaching the scaffolding on how to navigate Teams on Microsoft 365. And you would think, oh no, they're digital natives, it's easy. The reality is that yes, for some certain things, they do have, they're natives. And in other ones, they're not. And
exactly. So I don't, it's definitely much more nuanced, right? And so
yeah, it's teaching, right? At the end of the day, it is teaching. And I get it. There's some teachers that are more, social emotionally inclined and understand that. And I mean, you go to a kindergarten teacher and they just know how they tick, right? I wouldn't be able to do that. But maybe maybe the issue is not teaching per se. It's how we recruit professionals into the teaching profession, which was an issue with doctors, right? At some point, we recruited the best and brightest students that could memorize the data and then put it on a page and then just say it. But then we realized communication was really important in bedside manner, right? So I think it might be more of a recruiting policy and how we portray the profession. And yes, it is in transition. There's no question there. But everybody's in transition right now, right? So we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have another session based on this, Arman, and a debate about the role of the teacher, and the future role of the teacher, because I think what's underlying even this kind of discussion, right, is about different perspectives around what is the role of the teacher, and then given that role, who is that teacher, right? Is it the traditional teacher or is it someone else? And, and I think we've been talking a little bit, and we've been dancing around this topic around what is the science and research out there, and I've been quite surprised, I have to say, that the number of people who've never heard of andragogy or humanagogy and talk about pedagogical approaches, which is for children. And I've been surprised, that there's obviously differences in learning styles based on your age, right? Whether, like you said, you're in kindergarten or an adult. And so we have included some resources here for those of you who are interested. To kind of learn about andragogy and pedagogy with technology, and different approaches to doing that, because that was very much the starting point of the creation of Gnowbe, right? Which was really about humanizing the learning experience, not to replace the educator. And let's call the educator the teacher for now, who has many, many roles that we just talked about. But it was to bring that human experience of including social and emotional learning and intelligence, and using technology, not just for the hard stuff, but also some of the softer stuff, right? And so I think we might have different points of view here, but I mean, I think there are opportunities, and I guess the challenge I'm going to ask you both is that let's assume that we're not back at school now, because many people are trying to figure out what do they do with remote learning, right? Virtual remote learning. So how can educational institutions adapt to more human approaches with technology, right? And so to be able to do that social and emotional learning, the collaboration, the one-on-one, and what are you guys seeing? Because it's challenging. You don't have it in front of you. You can't give them a hug when they're crying. So how do you do that using technology?
I mean, I guess I can start off. I guess, So Young, I'm not sure I would, I guess I would reframe the question a bit, because it's not just about tech. It's like, how can educational institutions adapt to more human approaches, period?
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
And
100%.
right,
Yeah, I
so
asked it this way because this topic is about remote learning. So the topic of human approaches to education, we can talk about, like, it's a huge topic, but because
yeah,
we're talking about remote learning and the virtual experience, the challenge I think people are facing, especially in this micro topic within a broader topic,
yeah.
is around the remote experience. So how do you do that? And I think you both shared some good examples of doing that. But is there anything more in terms of that human side?
I mean, I think it's all the things that we talked about, and I think the context matters a lot. Obviously, in the U.S., very different than the other side of the globe, in places like in Southeast Asia and things of that nature, and the role that actually schools play it's like it goes out to this notion of what is the definition of success. And I think there's this fundamental tension between short-term tangible ways to measure it, which are limited by its very nature, and then the long-term the secondary tertiary effects of what happens when students spend 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day for 180 200 days a year for 12 years or
Yeah.
something like that. So I don't know. I'll flip it over to Armand.
I love the philosophical part there. I agree with John. I mean, I think we've touched on it, but to humanize it, there's two things that I think we need to do going forward, especially if we want to build it back better, which is the rallying cry, I think, for education. One is to humanize the leadership and to prioritize leadership in schools in terms of them being a central learning institution for the community and being the connector for the community that they are, and understanding that role as much as the management role of the data for academic purposes, particularly in settings where standardized testing is a massive pressure. I think that's one thing that we could do to humanize education a lot more, is to really understand that context and to do a better job of giving them the support they need instead of the isolation they feel, to be able to then support the teachers who support the students, who support the community, I think is key. I think we need to rethink that aspect of it, and that we are in service of the students. We are in service of the community as teachers. School leadership's in service of teachers to be able to deliver that. And school districts and policymakers and politicians are in service of the school leaders to be able to deliver that to the school teachers. I think that's something that we need to rethink, because oftentimes it's about them. And then the second thing is, from a humanizing point of view, I think we need a wraparound approach to education, which is we need to bring down those silos, and we need everybody at the table for these discussions. And we touched upon it, engineers creating for engineers, when it really needs to be, we need teachers in those rooms, actual practitioners. And we need to realize what public education does for our societies. And public education is to bring everybody together and to give everybody an opportunity to create a better life. And if you are going to strip down public education, and if you're going to pot holes to it and create opportunities and different views for the top echelon to then bypass public education, you are now creating two-tier networks. Yeah. And we're seeing the effects of that in the United States over the last 30 or 40 years of privatizing education. So I think to humanize it, you really need to think about what education's all about. Yeah. And a wraparound approach to it where the whole community is pulling together, I believe, is where we need to go. Because I don't have an expertise. Like, I have a kid that wants to launch rockets. He wants to be an astronaut. Well, I need a chemist. I need somebody that has been an astronaut. I need people to bring into my classroom that can help paint the picture for this kid of where he needs to go. That motivates him. Then I can get him there. But I can't necessarily make those contacts, right? So
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough that I have a network like you two, but it's not every teacher that has that opportunity, right? So I think that would humanize it a bit more.
Thank you. And I mean, I know I'm sensitive to the fact that we're right on time now, and I know you have to go to class. You know, I'd love to just kind of wrap up and ask John maybe also just to share some reflections. We also invite everyone to share their reflections. There's a number of resources here available to you as well, including some free stuff, which I think is always great, the digital certificates, etc. So please do take advantage of that. But just any closing reflections, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, thanks. First of all, thank you for pulling this together. It's just terrific to be with both of you. Secondly, you know, my focus has always been on how can we focus on the management and entrepreneurial activities to bring about pattern-breaking change. And the patterns that we've been talking about with Armand and everybody, you know, with you today, that's been there for eons. So we need to figure out ways to break that pattern. And I guess my final reflection is where I started, which is I think in some ways the pandemic has broken the pattern of our daily lives. And it's going to give us an opportunity to change the pattern of how we think about education. And we should not lose this opportunity to do so. But thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. I think Armand had to run to class. So he ran to class because I think he was running late. But thank you so much, John and Armand, who can see this video later. But so, I mean, obviously, we touched on so many topics from humanizing tech to socioeconomic differences. And we can definitely have, I would think, 20 conversations around this minimum. So thank you all. I do invite everyone to continue to have the conversation with us. I'd love to continue to engage with all of you and hear your experiences. Please do post your questions into the group chat so that we can continue to answer them there as well. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Thanks, So Young.
Thanks, John.